All right, so we are going to look at multiplying and dividing integers, positive and negative numbers. Primarily on this video, we're going to be looking at multiplying, but that's just because all the rules that apply to multiplying also apply to dividing. So a few things. There's going to be a couple different ways that multiplication is going to be shown besides the standard just X symbol. A lot of times you'll see the dot in between two numbers. That means multiplication as well. But the more common one that you're going to see a ton in the next coming months and years is going to be seeing a couple numbers together, separated only by parentheses. And if there's no symbol between the number and the parentheses, it means it's multiplying. Okay, so keep that in mind. Let's take a look at our warm-up though. We had 3 times 4 equals 12, and we know that means 4 plus 4 plus 4. We have three groups of 4, not 3 groups of 4, but 3 4s, and that gives us 12. If we take that same understanding to negative numbers, if we do negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4, 3 times negative 4, that's going to give us negative 12. So we see when we have this positive 3 times this negative 4, that's how it's giving us this negative 12, which kind of brings us to our first rule of multiplying or dividing integers. Any positive integer times a negative integer is going to equal a negative integer. So 15 times negative 4, just think about 15 times 4, and if it's if the positive times negative, that gives us a negative 60. Or if you have a negative times a positive, commutative property tells us, doesn't matter what order it is, negative times a positive will also equal a negative. So basically, if the signs are different and you're multiplying together, you're going to get a negative product. Negative 12 times positive 3 gives us a negative 36. 12 times 3 is 36. The signs are different, so that means it's negative. So if rule number 1 was about having signs that were different and multiplying them together, rule number 2 is probably going to be giving us something along the signs if we have the signs the same. So if we have two negatives multiplied by each other, that gives us a positive, such as negative 8 times negative 6, which gives us a positive 48. Or negative 2 times negative 10 gives us a positive 20. The two negatives as your factors gives us a positive product. And also, this isn't up here, but it's kind of assumed, positive times a positive also equals positive. Hence the very excited man here about staying positive for rule number 2. So maybe wondering how do you get a positive product when you're multiplying a negative number a negative amount of times. But if we look back at this example of 3 times negative 4, we have negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4 gives us negative 12. Let's see if we can find a pattern to kind of help us understand how a negative, two negative factors can give us a positive product. We have 3 times negative 4 gives us negative 12. 2 times negative 4 equals negative 8. 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. 0 times negative 4 is 0. Negative 1 times negative 4 is 4. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. Negative 3 times negative 4 is 12. So maybe seeing this pattern right here and seeing how it goes can kind of shed a little bit of light on why these two negatives end up being a positive product. So if you have several numbers that you're multiplying like this, like a negative 3 times 2 times negative 5 times 1, you can actually kind of just ignore the signs at first and then just think 3 times 2 times 5 times 1, which is going to give us 30. Now, the reason I had a negative right there, if you have an odd number of negative numbers, your product is negative. I have 1, 2, 3 negative numbers, which is an odd number of negative numbers. So my product is negative. And the reason that's so is because every pair of negative numbers gives you a positive. So every time you have 2 negative numbers, that's giving you a positive. When you have an odd number, that means there's one negative that doesn't have a pair to make a positive. So on the other side of that, if you have several numbers like negative 4 times negative 2 times 10 times negative 1 times negative 6, if I just ignore the signs and multiply these all together, I get 480. The reason it's positive, though, is because I have an even number of negative numbers. I have 1, 2, 3. I have 4 negative numbers. This negative 4 and this negative 2 turn into a positive 8. So 8 times 10 gives me 80. And then this negative 1 times negative 6 gives me a positive 6. So 80, positive 80 times positive 6 gives me 480, because every pair of negatives makes a positive. So the rules in review, I don't know why that came first. Rule number 1, if the signs are different, either positive times negative or negative times positive, you get a negative. Different signs gives you a negative product. Same signs give you a positive product. And the same rules apply for division. A positive divided by a negative or a negative divided by a positive will give you a negative quotient, or two positive numbers divided together or two negative numbers divided together would give you a positive quotient. So that is all the operations for integers.